Kia tau te rangamari ai, o tarangi e tu iho nei, o papatua nuku e tokotou nei, o te tau e awhi nei, ki runga I a tātou, tihei mauri ora.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Discussing Tourism webinar. My name is Steve Hanrahan. I'm the Advocacy Manager for TIA and facilitator for today's webinar. The Discussing Tourism focus today is Budget 2020, released yesterday by the government. Our panellists are the Minister of Tourism, the Honourable Kelvin Davis, and TIA Chief Executive Chris Roberts. Following opening comments from the Minister, we will have Q&A from attendees. And please note the Q&A button at the base of the screen and send your questions through. The webinar is scheduled for 30 minutes, and as the Minister has to leave by 9:30, so we won't run over time. So Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Steve. Minister, a big announcement yesterday, of course, with the budget, following on from some previous announcements around helping out our tourism industry. Perhaps you'd like to make some opening remarks about what the government's done to this point.
Kia ora, Chris. Thank you very much. Kia ora everybody who's joined into this Zoom call. Look, we need to start from the very beginning when COVID hit New Zealand and the government put in place a substantial support package in the tens of billions of dollars, of which the tourism industry has accessed many billions of that through the wage subsidy scheme, through the various tax measures, through the small business loan scheme and all those things. That was the first wave of support to everybody, including the tourism industry. Yesterday's budget was the second wave of support, and there will be further waves of support, as the Finance Minister said in his speech. This is just the first. In fact, I've got the relevant paragraph here. He says the budget today makes the first contribution from the government to the tourism sector recovery plan. And the $400 million is sector specific. It goes to tourism on top of the other things. And what we did was we listened to what the sector was saying, and everybody, the pressing need, the feedback we're getting about the pressing need was for an extension of the wage subsidy scheme. So that wage subsidy scheme has been extended for a further 8 weeks. It'll cost the country up to $3.2 billion. And then we have the $400 million tourism sector recovery money. Now, that's been split into two parts. The first part is around the Tourism Transitions Program, and this is so that we can provide advice and guidance to those tourism businesses who are going to need to pivot their product domestically, or may need help to manage through until the trans-Tasman tourism kicks off, or to hibernate, or to seek other options for their business. Now that any businesses who are interested in that could register their interest immediately. There are contact details on both the Tourism New Zealand and the MB websites. That was the first part. The second part was around the Strategic Tourism Assets program. And to describe a strategic tourism asset is one of those assets, tourism assets that has positive flow-on effects to other parts of the community, or maybe to the region, if not nationally. And the example I used is the one up north, just out of Whangarei, is a little village called Tutukaka, and tens of thousands of visitors would descend on Tutukaka because the tourism operator there would take people out on boats to the Poor Knights Island Marine Reserve. They jump in the pristine water and swim around with millions of fish. Now, when that business is doing well, it has a positive spin-off effect to the cafe next door, to the fishing charter along the jetty, to the dairy, to the service station. And if we weren't able to look after a business like that, then that whole village and that whole area would suffer as a result, and probably right into Whangarei itself. Another example is, of course, whale watch down in Kaikoura. That is really what drives the Kaikoura economy, and it would be silly of us not to find some way to support that business. But every business will need a bespoke solution for them to meet their particular needs, and that's what this targeted $400 million is to do. Those two programs, the tourism transitions and also the strategic assets. So if businesses have exhausted all private sector options in terms of support, that's when this would be an option for them. There are a couple of other little things in yesterday's announcement. One is that we're setting up a tourism recovery ministers group made up of myself as the Minister of Tourism, Nanaia Mahuta as the Minister for Māori Tourism, Eugenie Sage as the Minister for Conservation, and Under Secretary Tabato, who has responsibilities in regional economic development. So this is an across-government group that will oversee this whole program. And the final part of what we're developing is what we're calling the New Zealand Tourism Futures Task Force, and that's the reimagining of tourism into the future. Things will be different, and we've got to make sure that we set up the tourism for the future. Eventually, numbers, when the borders open and that, we'll have numbers that are approaching what we had pre-COVID, but we also had some issues with that, with those numbers, and we've got to make sure that we mitigate those issues. And that's what the Tourism Futures Task Force, made up of industry, made up of government, non-government organisations, conservation, communities, regional, city representation. It's going to be broad-based, and it's going to represent the views and basically implement what we want the future of tourism to look like. Oh, sorry, and the final part is Tourism New Zealand's renewed focus on a domestic tourism campaign. Now, we've agreed that we need to ease into that. We could have spent $2 million last week or 2 weeks ago encouraging people to go out and have a holiday when no one was able to go out on holiday. I have total confidence in Tourism New Zealand and their ability to use their experience, their insights, their knowledge to actually launch the campaign that's ready to go, and it's going to target our domestic market in the right way. They've got years of experience in marketing overseas, internationally. Now they're having to pivot and swing towards the domestic domestic market. So, sort of in a nutshell, that's the bones of what we put out in yesterday's budget.
Thanks, Minister. I know on my screen you're currently frozen. That might just be my screen, so hopefully, but I can certainly hear you. I don't know how others what their vision is at the moment, but a couple of opening questions, because I know plenty of questions are coming through from our audience. So there's the wage subsidy and then a specific 400 million tourism recovery program. Personally, do you think that's enough? Did you advocate for more than this on behalf of the industry?
Look, I'm not going to go into the conversations that we had in Cabinet, but I can assure everybody in the tourism industry that the feedback that we received through the TNZ online discussions that we've been having was fed into Cabinet. There's not a Cabinet Minister that doesn't understand and appreciate the impact of COVID-19 on the tourism industry. We have had substantial discussions. I've represented all that feedback into Cabinet, but at the end of the day, there is consensus, collective decision making, and the results of anything all ministers stand by.
Most tourism businesses will certainly qualify for the extended wage subsidy because the the threshold's been set at 50% lost revenue, and that's pretty common across our sector, that they've had at least that loss of revenue. But there will be many, I know many are disappointed that the extension's only for a further 8 weeks. Can they anticipate any further support to keep people in jobs after September?
So there's a couple of parts to that. First of all, this is the second wave after the initial wave of support, the second wave, and as I said earlier in the comments and quoted from the Minister of Finance's speech, that this is the first contribution from the government to the tourism sector recovery plan. So in terms, we had discussions around the wage subsidy scheme. And again, this is where it's landed. But you know, look, we have to be perfectly honest. There are no more international tourists coming here, and they won't be coming here for quite some time. And people are just going to have to pivot towards the domestic market. It will be a softer domestic market, but you know, we've closed the borders. Other countries have closed their borders. There's a heck of a lot of work to do to get COVID under control internationally, and any decision to open borders is going to be a health-based decision. There has to be foreign affairs work done, immigration work, customs work. You know, there's a lot of work to be done. And one thing that I have said is that we cannot tie workers to jobs that will not exist in the future. And people just have to understand. And look, I'm not, you know, I sound like I'm preaching to the converted. Is that people are going to have to make some decisions. We've said from the outset that we will not save every business, we will not save every job, but we are trying our very best, and this is a substantial package. If you take the extended wage subsidy, the $400 million, and this is just the next wave of support that we're offering.
Thanks, Minister. Steve, I can see there's plenty of questions coming in from those on the webinar, so do you want to put some of those questions to the Minister?
Yeah, sure. All right, thanks Chris, thanks Minister. Chris, perhaps just one for you to kick off with. Why did TIA take a favourable view of the budget?
Yeah, look, I guess from the industry there were a mix of reactions, official reactions to the budget. I think we see this as a long game, that the budget is just part of an ongoing process of rescuing our industry from the deepest crisis it's ever been in. And I think of the recent announcements, the most significant was allowing domestic travel at level 2. That's an absolute lifesaver for our industry. And we were very pleased that the government listened to the industry and agreed that we could safely travel around New Zealand again and get connected again. So that was really important. And the other initial measures the Minister has mentioned, and then the budget yesterday, and then very importantly, the very clear message that this is just the start, that there's more to come. Tourism was the first industry to be hit, it'll be the last to recover. And so this is not just a one-off budget and that's your lot. We expect to be engaged in ongoing discussions with the government on what else will need to be done to support our industry in the coming months and in the coming years, because there is a long road to recovery. So yes, we were reasonably positive and perhaps more positive than some other groups about the budget, but we think you know, it was a good start in our view.
All right, thanks, Chris. Minister, there's a question here about, are you able to share a plan with us? Are you able to give New Zealand a realistic expectation of how long you think it will be before the trans-Tasman Pacific bubble opens up and international borders might start opening? So the question acknowledges we understand it's all subject to change, but a plan would be good.
Look, that's why we have the Tourism Futures Task Force also to, you know, that's been established to engage on the plan looking forward. But look, in terms of the trans-Tasman work, again, there's a lot of work that needs to be done on both sides of the Tasman. There's a lot of work that needs to be done at those other levels, such as I said, such as foreign affairs, such as immigration, such as customs, such as a health decision, and we're working on it behind the scenes to try and make things happen. But in terms of giving a time frame, I simply can't, because I simply can't give a time frame, and I would be remiss to put out a time frame there and have people go, oh, the minister said it's going to happen in X time frame, so let's start preparing our business for that, and then it doesn't happen, and they go, oh, crikey, based on the minister's, he's giving us conflicting information. In terms of the wider border issues, look, the border is like a driveway with gates on both ends. One end here, one gate here in New Zealand, and another gate somewhere else in the world, and both gates have to be open. Now, we're probably, because of our going fast and going hard, we've got ourselves, near to opening that gate, but we just have no say and no control over when the other gate at the other end of the driveway is going to be open. And to be honest, everybody can see what's happening around the world. We can read the news. We can probably say, oh, cases are starting to come down in this country or that country. But the reality is it's just speculation at this moment. So I cannot give anyone any sort of clarity around both when the trans-Tasman tourism can commence, or when global tourism can commence. People are just not traveling at the moment, and that's why we have to be able to pivot to the domestic market.
Thank you. Excuse me. Minister, on a question here on News Talk Radio this morning, the Finance Minister said that the tourism support package had only been signed off this week. Are you able to explain why it took so long, given we were the first industry to suffer?
Because the plan had taken some time to develop. We had a number of iterations. We constantly refined it, and in fact, all budget stuff was signed off on Monday to be announced, yesterday. But it took some time. We had a number of iterations of the plan where we had feedback in from, various places, and this is where we've landed. But we've had to make decisions in real time. We've had to come up with the plan in real time. Normally, if we take, say, the tourism strategy that we launched last year, that took a year to develop, and it had various iterations, and so this is just how long it's taken to come up with the future direction. And I think if everybody looks at how much money that the tourism industry has got, before we count the $400 million package, it amounts to billions of dollars. Billions of dollars in the wage subsidy support, billions of dollars through the business package, and this is the next part of the recovery.
Minister, another one here. Is it possible to have some detail around the tourism asset protection plan? Can we access cash if we own a significant tourism asset? And if so, how?
Well, it all comes down to working out that bespoke solution. So it's not a one size fits all. So what's good for this tourism business over here and what's good for this strategic asset over there are going to be different. So this is where people you'll have to sit down and work through with officials exactly what is the solution that your business needs, and that's how the plan for that business will be developed. And look, if it takes money, it takes money. I mean, that's why we've put $400 million in the pot for now, for people to be able to access, depending on what their bespoke solution becomes.
Great. Minister, there's a couple of questions here around some detail on accessing support. Can you please give us detail on the tourism transition program and what steps an operator needs to take to access support?
Okay, so I said yesterday that There are contact details, and I said it earlier in this, this session, there are contact details on the TNZ and the MB websites. You know, just go in there, make contact, and the support will start. You know, somebody will be in touch, officials will be in touch, and then we start working on what it is for your particular business.
A question here, Minister, on the domestic campaign. Is the undisclosed amount allocated to the domestic campaign the right way to spend this money, given the struggles to get Kiwis to open their wallets? Why not allocate at least half the amount on a campaign targeted at Australians once the trans-Tasman buffer opens?
Oh, look, Tourism New Zealand, they've thought through all of this. So, you know, when we closed the borders to China initially, we gave $11 million in total, 10 million to market to other destinations and 1 million for a domestic campaign. When we realized the size of, you know, what was happening with COVID, TNZ paused those campaigns. So there's still, you know, a big pot of money there that they're turning to the domestic campaign. And you know, international marketing is what they've been doing all this time. So when we you know, when the borders do open to Australia, they will pivot to that. I have an utmost confidence in their ability to run a domestic campaign and to pivot to the Australian market, and when borders finally do open, to the global market. In fact, part of their thinking has been that we still need to keep New Zealand alive in the hearts and minds of a global audience. So there's, you know, a little bit of work being done to that. But Tourism New Zealand are experts. They are probably some of the, if not the best in the world at marketing, and I've got total confidence in what they do.
Minister, a question here about the event sector. When is the government going to get serious about our business event sector that has been shut down, or be shut down for 8 to 10 months? This is one of our highest value sectors and needs cash flow support.
Yeah, look, and the event sector well knows that that Minister Twyford is the Minister for Economic Development, is the minister where events come under his portfolio, and that they have been engaging. I've been informed that they have engaged with that minister and with his officials, and they're working on a plan, and my belief is the plan is being released next week. So, you know, the government has worked directly with the events sector, and we're expecting that plan. So this has come up a few times, and there's something underway, is the best I can describe it. And you know, I'm interested to see what that plan entails, but it does come under the portfolio of Minister Twyford. And you know, once the plan is here, then he and his officials will be making decisions about what to do next to support the events sector.
Minister, there are some questions here from operators with the theme of we don't need a whole lot of money to spent on advice, for example, in the transitions program, that operators know what they need to do. They know how to run their businesses and they need cash flow support. Give an answer to that.
Well, there has been cash flow support, and the $400 million. And to be frank, there are some businesses that do need advice. They do need advice to, you know, pivot to the domestic market. They do maybe need advice to hibernate. They may need advice on other options. So that is there, but there will be as part of that. You know, we need to be flexible and nimble enough if there's some money that's needed. But remember, everybody has to have exhausted all the private sector options as well. This isn't, you know, we need to make sure that people are getting advice. We need to make sure that we are creating bespoke solutions for businesses. You know, so I think that this package is actually addressing that.
There's still some questions here on the strategic tourism asset. How do you apply to be a strategic tourism asset? And the other one, would the strategic assets include adventure tour operators in the same way as those nature-based ones like the examples given? And how are those funds accessed?
Yeah, so again, you know, access the contact details on TNZ and MB website. Officials will be in touch, and then they will work through that process in terms of sitting down and working out the bespoke solutions for businesses. Don't know if I quite understand what the second part of that was.
Sure, it was just in regards to the type of businesses that might be able to be considered under that program.
Oh, so
the sectors.
The type. Well, look, if there is a business that believes that they are a strategic tourism asset, that they have positive flow-on effects to, you know, beyond their business into their community, into their region, you know, get in touch. Look, you know, the thing is if you don't know, if you're not sure, just ask, and somebody will be, you know, will be there to respond to your, you know, to your queries. So, you know, that's what I suggest. Just access via the contact details on the TNZ and the MB websites.
Just one more, still linked to this one, Minister. Specifically, what does exhaustion of private sector options mean? Any idea of what the quantum being talked about?
So if businesses think that, you know, just come to the government and get a bailout, that can't happen. You've got to have gone through all the, you know, all the various pathways, and I'm sure many people have done that you know, before coming to the government for the extra support. So that's what that means. You know, look, and again, I don't want to tell people how to suck eggs. You know, have you been to the bank? Have you tried all those things? Have you accessed the other parts of the business package that we've had to offer? You know, small business cash flow loan scheme, all that sort of stuff. Have you made use of the tax measures? And then, you know, if you have, then you know, come to the government and seek that support then. There was a second part to that question though. Can you just repeat it, Steve?
Sorry, I think I don't have it there any longer, actually, Minister. Well, just the last question now, if I could, and we're mindful of time. What's the government's plan to save inbound tourism operators? They depend on 100% international business, and there was no way we could pivot to domestic tourism.
Look, and as I've said, we will not be able to save every business and every job. But, you know, in the second wave, we might be able to have some sort of bespoke solution for the inbound tourism operators. But, you know, to be perfectly honest, there is no international tourism. And if people were hoping that yesterday's package was going to open the borders today, you know, this package won't do it for them. So, you know, we just do not know how long before the borders will be open. And as I said earlier, we cannot tie workers to jobs that may not exist in the future. And if people think that, say, for 2 years, say, the government is just going to pay people to exist, you know, we just need to have a reality check. And it may not be the message that people want to hear, but, you know, I just have to be straight up. I just have to be honest. There are some businesses that will struggle.
Well, we'll draw it to a close there. I'm mindful of time. Thank you, Minister, for your comments and answers to our questions. And thank you also to Chris. And thank you to our members for participating today and for your questions. The webinar will be available on the TIA website by the end of today. Chris, over to you for closing karakia. You're on mute, Chris.
Sorry, Steve. Yes, I spotted a couple of questions there also that came through about Tourism New Zealand's budget and whether that was separate. And yes, it is. It is separate from the 400 million. Tourism New Zealand have retained their normal budget, but of course we'll be looking to spend some of that budget on domestic tourism and retaining quite a bit of that budget for Australia and for other international markets when the opportunities arise. But those are no doubt some more details we'll be receiving on that in the weeks ahead from Tourism New Zealand. Thank you for everyone who participated today, and I know there were a lot of questions we couldn't get to in the time. Kua mutu a mātou mahi, mō tēnei wā, anakitia mai mātou katoa, o mātou hoa, o mātou whānau, ai o ki te aorangi. Kia ora, have a good morning, everyone.
Kia ora, thank you.
Here.